Morning, everyone. We've got a few of you starting to sign on. Just going to give everyone a couple minutes to get signed on and set up, and then we'll get started. Okay, it looks like we've kind of got a critical mass of attendees now. So good morning. Thank you for joining us for the September webinar of the City Efficiency Leadership Council. I'm very excited about this topic today. Our webinar today came together by a couple kind of chance meetings that myself and Mary L. Kramer from SPEAR, and this is Cassidy Ellis, Local Governments Program Manager from SPEAR, failed to mention that. So this webinar today came together as the result of a couple chance meetings. Mary Ellen and I saw Krystal speak at the Department of Energy Better Building Summit, and then Dana and I met through some work that we're doing in the energy space in Austin, and just seemed like a really great fit to bring these two organizations together to talk about how equity informs our work around energy, and how we need to consider the equity, or how we consider the equity lens when we're talking about energy. So as usual, a couple quick announcements. My usual overview of what the City Efficiency Leadership Council is. It is a collaborative of Texas cities and other local entities working around energy management best practices and energy efficiency. We share resources, we provide education and outreach, we connect you to each other depending on what you're working on and where your needs are. If you're interested in learning more, I will send a follow-up email to the group today with my contact information and any links and announcements that come up during this webinar this morning. A few announcements for some CELC events coming up. We have our kind of late fall, early winter City Efficiency Leadership Council roundtables. They are in the process of being planned, but we're targeting late October for our North Central Texas meeting, a November meeting in the Gulf Coast, and then we do have a date for our Central Texas meeting on December 11th in Kyle. We will be having that at an ACC facility designed for public safety training. It's an interesting building. It's a LEED silver building, and they have they basically train police officers, and so we will have a tour as well as our roundtable. So I'm looking forward to that. Our next webinar, confirmed as of this morning, will be on the Energy Water Nexus with Jonathan Kleinman from Aqueous here in Austin, and that will be October 17th, 9 to 10. We'll send a registration link around after the webinar. We developed a new white paper on energy savings performance contracting best practices. This is the result of interviews that Marielle and I completed with energy services companies, city managers, energy managers, primarily from cities, and it is just in their own words, as the result of our interviews, what they think a person embarking on an ESPC should consider in their approach to the project. Finally, we have the Texas Energy Summit coming up in Austin on November 12th through 14th. There are public sector scholarships available for this conference. I went to it last year. It's really interesting, bringing together of the array of the energy sector in Texas. So we have clean tech, we have equity. Dana will be there, I will be there, renewables, efficiency, policy, advocacy. It's a great conference, and as I said, there are opportunities for public sector folks to attend free of charge. So other than that, we'll move right along to our presentation this morning. So as I mentioned, we have actually 3 presenters this morning. Krystal Laymon is with the U.S. Department of Energy, and she's a policy advisor. As I mentioned, we saw her give a similar presentation on the tools that they are working on around energy and equity at the Better Buildings Summit. Dana Harmon and Jacquie Moss are with the Texas Energy Positive Poverty Research Institute, or TEPRI, and they will talk about some local Texas research that they are doing using the tool that Krystal will share with us. So I am going to turn it over to Krystal. If you want to grab my screen, and you can give a kind of introduction of yourself and launch into your tool.
Sure, and thank you so much for the invitation. Let me just go ahead and share my screen. One moment while I do that. So a little bit about me. My office is under the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy at the U.S. Department of Energy, and I primarily focus on state as well as city clean energy goals and clean energy objectives. So where I sit, we do a lot of special programs, and in particular, this, which is focused on equity, was a accumulation of a 2-year program called the Clean Energy for Low-Income Communities Accelerator, and we just sunsetted it. And from the efforts, we were able to create quite a wealth of resources. I'll just quickly show here. This is a website that we've built, and it's for state and city program managers as well as folks who are interested in this space. So you can take a look at that website once you are done with this webinar here. But ultimately, from this program, we were able to work with over 30 different state and local governments. And for the first year, we talked about what are your main issues. And we saw when it came to this space, people have many different issues. And not only that, your jurisdictions are different, your goals may be different. Some are focusing more on energy efficiency, and some are focused on trying to bring renewables to this space. And then some are just trying to get a handle of what they can do in this space if they've never really been thinking through how to implement low income or disadvantaged communities or underserved communities with energy affordability. So one of the main topics that we discussed with the stakeholders was the use of data. And so this is what I'll primarily be speaking about during this conversation, but I do encourage you, switching back over to the screen, if you are interested in a particular topic, if it's single family, multifamily, or community solar, feel free to look at the site, and of course, feel free to communicate with me as well. And we also, I'll just make a quick plug, we also just announced the folks who are interested in community solar. Yesterday, the Department of Energy announced a new program that I'm helping with that's focused on bringing community solar deployment to low-income areas. So if you just Google, you're able to find our new announcement. You can sign up to receive information for the future free technical assistance that we'll be providing for stakeholders. So when it came to talking about energy affordability or energy burden, so energy burden is the percent of someone's income that goes to their energy bills, and oftentimes for people that don't make very much, that can be a higher amount. We're trying to see a decrease in that, and you can do that in many different ways. You can do that through primarily energy efficiency, primarily through weatherization. There's been many studies been done that show that the efforts of those activities can significantly bring down the cost of someone's energy bill. And then also, depending on the circumstance, some renewables could be included to help make the situation more equitable. So one of the items when I was speaking to these stakeholders was the use of data. And I am a huge data fan because really when it comes to justifying programs and also to talk about how we can implement and track items, you really need to use the data. So we created this tool because of our stakeholders' need to understand what was happening on the ground. And this tool, it's called the LEAD tool, LEAD, and that stands for Low Income Energy Affordability Data Tool. And this tool takes information from the American Community Surveys, the Census Bureau that occurs annually. And then it also takes information from our own Department of Energy's Energy Information Administration. So it's a combination of two different data sets that we went ahead and digested and were able to put on this tool. So when you open up, and this is open to the public, it's free. I mean, everything we do on the federal level is for the public. So you can quickly just use this URL here, and I will send it to the organizers to send out as well. So once you're here, you go into a splash page, and it shares with you a nice welcome note. And depending on what type of program or policy you're looking at, you can choose between federal poverty level or area median income. So I will use federal poverty level here. And also I should make a note, our methodology document is available as well as our one-pager, which is really helpful for folks. And we created a video tutorial for folks who would like to watch how one can use the tool. So I'll click go. So you will be brought to some maps of the United States, and you'll see on the top energy burden. And what's great is that as you hover over, it's pretty interactive, you're able to see the energy burden. And right now, my filters are selected. So as I go down, so 0 to 150, you can see it shift. You can see now the shift there. We also have the information on annual energy cost, if you'd like to get an understanding of how much people spend annually on their energy bills. And you can again hover over, and then get to Texas, hover over here, and then you can compare yourself to other states surrounding you as well. In addition, we have housing counts, which has been helpful for the stakeholders that we've spoken to that are interested in targeting a certain amount of homes, or their constituents are focused on more residential areas. And you can see here the housing. I will switch back to energy burden. What's pretty great about this tool is how detailed it is. So let's say, again, Texas. You can view the counties. So if you are looking at a certain program and you want to see where you can maybe have the biggest impact, and again, you can hover and it will populate with the county name. And again, this is reflective of the filters I have on the left, so 0 to 150 FPL, but if I select, it'll shift. And with cities, I'll let that load. There we go. So with cities here, there are two ways of being able to view a city of interest. You can either go on the right-hand side and choose, and you can see the percentage of energy burden. Again, you can switch it if you're interested in energy expenditures, or the annual energy cost here, and as you see, it shifts. On the right-hand side, go back to % income here. So you can very easily click, and I'll choose a random one here about Falls City down here, and click it. And what's really neat about the tool that I was really happy when we created it is you're able to compare. So anytime you click a state, city, county, we also have census tract too, and that's been very helpful for the folks that are interested in getting down to the census level. So what's great is that you can hit compare, and you see that my comparisons are populated on the left-hand side, and then you can see the charts. And here, information has been selected. And again, it's from what I had on the left-hand side, so 0 to 200. And I clicked Texas as well as Falls City, and you can compare the differences here. Another great feature is our other filters. So if you want to get more information on building age, if you want to look at buildings that have a certain age bracket in terms of the vintage of when it was built, not usually, but oftentimes depending on when the home or building was built, it could be less efficient. So if you want to dig deep in that category, you can. I'm just selecting a few. And on the charts, you can hit your secondary dimension, the building age, and on the bottom, it populates what I selected on the left-hand side. In addition, if you're interested in a certain fuel type, this came in handy. We were working with the state of Connecticut, and they were interested in understanding how they could scale a low-income solar program, and so they were focused heavily on electricity. You can also look at building type. So if you want to look at more multifamily buildings, you have the option of doing that there. And then you have the option of renter versus owner. So again, if you want to have a program targeting renters, you can very easily choose that. And then here we have an option to reset all. So the charts allow you to view and also compare. So you can see how it is here. And we also have on the charts the ability to do a right axis. So if you go here, you can choose whichever is most of interest to you. And I chose energy burden. And again, you can compare, you can see how extremely high of an energy burden it is for homes before 1940 in Falls City. Extremely high, very, very high, compared to the state of Texas here, which is 13, under this category of 0 to 100 FPL. And for the charts, what's neat too is that you can compare city to city, state by state, but not just within that own state. You can also, if you were interested in comparing a city to another city, you can very easily do that. You just have to go back to United States and just choose a city. And very easily, you're able to compare yourself. Use that one. And again, it will be populated. As you can see here, the comparisons are all listed. And you can go down the chart, and it'll all be populated down here. You can also very easily switch from FPL to area median income down here. Another great feature of the tool, there's a lot of data here, so you can export the data. You can also export the chart, so you can put it in a PowerPoint if you like, or you can just send it to someone. And this, when it populates, it also shows what you selected here at the bottom. And then you can do the data, and an Excel sheet will download, and you'll be able to see all of the information there. There we go. Oh. Another great feature is in terms of census. Here we can go back to Texas here. And we also have case studies. I should mention we have a couple cities, so for folks who are interested in seeing how others have used it, you can see that there. We're also planning on doing a few more as well. Right now I have many things selected, but what's great is that you can do night vision, this little moon here, so you can better see. And we're going to be updating this since this tool is so new, but you can easily, when you go over a census tract, you can also see the county. Another great feature is that if you are working with this tool and you would like to save your scenario, you can hit save scenario, and then up will be a unique URL, and you can send that to anyone that you like to see what type of graphs or maps that you have in place. I'm conscious of time. I'll just quickly go into configuration. This is really neat because depending on what you're looking at, you may want to build your own graph, your own chart. So let's say, for example, you want to focus on, you just drag and drop here, FPL, and this is your target area here of very low income. And here you can do, I'm just using, for example, other. So for example, you just want to focus on this here. You hit save. And what's great about this is that you're able to create your own chart. So on the bottom here, instead of 0 to 150, you now have what I populated here, which is low income and other. We also have an email. So if you have any other specific questions, we do have a methodology document that was on the splash page, and you can also look at it here, as well as our one-pager. And overall, we will be updating this once every 2 years as the census comes out. And with the large one, the 10-year one, we'll be doing an upgrade in that regard. And with that, I will end there, and happy to take questions now or after the webinar.
Thank you so much, Krystal. What an incredible tool. So I think maybe we should have questions at the end, and a reminder to the audience, there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you do have questions, please type those in, and we'll field those for both of our presentations at the end of the webinar. So I think we can jump into our panelists from TEPRI. So Dana and Jacquie, if you want to take it away. Thanks again, Krystal.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cassidy, and great presentation, Krystal. Thank you. Thank you for that. I have to admit, we are big cheerleaders of the LEAD tool, and we are really appreciative for the opportunity to kind of share some of the work that we've been doing with that data and with that tool. And we hope it's useful for this audience to see kind of a real world demonstration of how we're using the data for a very specific application related to TEPRI's mission, which is to inspire lasting energy solutions for low-income communities. Jacquie, could you go to the next slide, please? So, hi, my name is Dana Harmon, and I'm the Executive Director of TEPRI, the Texas Energy Poverty Research Institute. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Jacquie Moss, who's our head research fellow and lead author for this study that we'll be presenting today. Just quick TEPRI intro for those of you who may not be familiar with us. We are a collaboration of utilities, affordable housing providers, social service organizations, and environmental groups who are working together to inspire lasting energy solutions for low-income communities. So we provide research, tools, data, and act as a convener to try to bring together stakeholders to tackle some of the tough issues that we're facing here in Texas. So next I'll talk a little bit about our Low-Income Communities Profile series, which is the study that we'll be presenting kind of the first overview report of today. And this study was born out of a need to better understand the drivers and effects of energy poverty across Texas, and also to begin to suggest some pathways to address issues around energy insecurity for low-income communities in our state, and to ensure equitable energy and technology access. This project was in partnership with the LBJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas at Austin, and funded in part by the Environmental Defense Fund. We'd also like to say, of course, a huge thank you to our supporting members, which are shown there on the screen, without whom this work and all of the work that we do at TEPRI wouldn't be possible. So big thank you to our members. Now I'll talk a little bit about this study. So the purpose of our LICP series, or the Low-Income Communities Profile series, is to provide a detailed portrait of Texas low-income residents and their relationships to energy. We've collected and analyzed data around sociodemographics, certain energy behaviors, economic hardships, and housing, both housing type and housing tenure. But really our main focus of this work was to try to understand how all of those factors interact, and how those factors and the relationships to energy affect the quality of life for underserved communities, which include low-income communities, communities of color, renters who may not have access to certain energy technologies, et cetera. Krystal already talked a bit about energy burden, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but our definition is similar, but percentage of household income that's spent on energy. For the purpose of this study, our energy expenditures include electricity, utility gas, and bottled fuel. All of that data comes from the LEAD tool that Krystal was just sharing. We considered energy burdens high when more than 6% of household energy goes towards home energy costs. And that's, although there's really not a set in stone standard, that is a pretty common metric, that 6% threshold for when energy is considered unaffordable. We did want to clarify, we talk about energy burden a lot. We think it's a very important metric, but it does not tell us, it's not sufficient on its own. So it doesn't tell us who's going without basic energy services, whether that's because of affordability, a lack of awareness, or accessibility. So we think that energy burden is very important, but we also think that other factors need to be taken into consideration for a full picture of energy poverty and coping strategies or trade-offs that people are experiencing. So next I'll go into kind of the key insights or the executive summary for this study, and then I'll turn it over to Jacquie to really take us through some of the details of the study. But I'll just kind of start by saying that we foremost want to acknowledge that people's lives are varied and complicated. And so the concept of energy poverty is multidimensional, and we want to kind of appreciate that complexity. As I mentioned, energy burden is a useful but not sufficient signal of energy poverty. Low-income households across Texas had an average energy burden of 10%, which was compared to 2% for non-low-income households. And as might be expected for extremely low-income households, for us, for the purpose of this study, that's 0 to 30% of the area median income. That average exceeded 16%, so significant portions of income being spent on energy costs. Another key finding, which honestly surprised me a little bit from this study, was that homeowners, low-income homeowners, were a meaningful energy poverty reduction target. Almost half of low-income households in Texas were owner-occupied, so about 46%. And low-income owner-occupied households had a much higher energy expenditure compared to renter-occupied ones. So we're not saying don't pay attention to renters, of course, because renters are extremely important, but that percentage of low-income households who own their home is quite significant, which, we all know probably about the split incentive issues with renters, but also that there's meaningful energy poverty reduction targets with homeowners. Next, we looked at energy engagement by asking survey participants engagement questions like, do you review your electricity bills? Are you able to program your thermostat? And what we found was that low-income customers are engaged with their energy use, energy consumption, just not with programs. And so we mean programs like bill assistance or weatherization offered by utilities or by community action agencies. And so the awareness across the board was quite low. We also meaningfully recognized that younger respondents in Texas, meaning kind of the 18 to 34-year-old group, were often less aware of energy programs compared with older age groups. And that population, that 18 to 34-year-old population, is quite significant. So it was 41% of the total low-income population in Texas. So as young adults begin to make household energy decisions, we see an opportunity for targeted outreach and energy literacy in that area. And then finally, we thought it was important, as we were trying to understand quality of life implications, to look at trade-offs that people were making to balance their household expenses. Survey respondents in our study agreed that the most common trade-offs they make to afford their energy bills were clothing and food. With more extreme hardship, meaning with the very low and extremely low income populations, people shared that they sacrificed transportation, medicine, and housing as well. So that's kind of the key overview. Next, I'm going to do a quick review of our methodology, and then I'll turn it over to Jacquie to take us through some of the data itself. So our methodology was to use the LEAD tool that Krystal took us through, and a lot of the data from the American Community Survey and other data sets that are available through that tool, paired with a survey that TEPRI conducted in coordination with the LBJ school at UT. where we conducted a survey of a little over 2,000 low-income household energy decision makers across the state. And in that survey, we were analyzing housing characteristics, household makeup, economic hardships, socio-demographic indicators, and certain health indicators. So we had that kind of quantitative survey, and then we paired that with a series of qualitative interviews where we wanted to supplement those quantitative findings with, stories of real life people so that we could understand, kind of put that data in context. So we had sort of those three data sets coming together with the LEAD tool, our quantitative survey, and then our qualitative interviews that turned into the report that I will turn it over to Jacquie to share some of our key findings from. Jacquie?
Thanks, Dana. Hi, I'm Jacquie Moss, as Dana mentioned, and I like maps. I'm a geospatial analyst and also a visual communicator. So I'm going to share a lot of maps and charts with you and try to go fairly quickly through how we use the LEAD tool to establish context and inform the analysis that we did on the survey. So to start out with, in the survey design and dissemination, the team divided the state up into 11 regions to make sure that we had good representation from across the state. In the end, as Dana mentioned, we had over 2,000 responses to have and do have a statistically significant sample with that response rate. I just want to show you what that looks like in terms of those 2,000 responses and how they were distributed across the state. And then I'm going to move into talking about the LEAD tool a little bit. So when we started doing our analysis, this version that Krystal just showed, what we refer to as version 2, and I think Krystal does as well. I'm not sure. You can confirm that, Krystal. But we were working with version 1 of the tool, which was we were already super excited about, was a series of spreadsheets and very interactive ones. But we started there, and we are in the process of migrating over to version 2. So for the most part, what we're showing today, it represents version 2, but if you download our report, which is the Texas Overview Report, that is still version 1. And we have found some differences in there was a different data set used for version 2. It was 2016 vintage ACS versus the version 1 was 2015. And also, I think some of the methodology may have shifted a little bit. So needless to say, as we move through this, we're looking at the more recent data. So using the LEAD tool, what we wanted to do in setting context for the work that we do at TEPRI, not just with the LICP, but as we'll show you at the end with other project work that we do, we looked at household count by income category, and I'll talk to you in a second about what those income categories are and look like for the state of Texas, energy burden, and then we did multi-factor analysis, meaning we looked at each of these things relative to energy burden, but then we also tried to look at each of these things kind of relative to each other. So we looked at rent versus own, building age, number of housing units, and fuel type. And all of that establishing context as we look at our survey data, and our survey data really telling us about the lived circumstances of people who are experiencing energy insecurity. So for that was looking at bill stress, thermal comfort, housing condition, energy engagement, program awareness, and then falling into some of the demographics around age, marital status, educational attainment, and others. So our low income definition, for the purpose of our work, we're mostly working with area median income because it takes into account cost of living adjustments. But because a lot of programs are administered using FPL, we provide this table on the left that just shows a loose comparison or a rough comparison between how you can use one versus the other. So for our work, what we're going to show today, we use extreme, very, low, and non, using AMI accordingly. And the LEAD tool has 80 to 100 and then 100 plus as categories. We just combined those together into 80% plus for the non-category. So as we look at these large chunks, the color chunks, we've got 15% of the state in the extreme category, 15% in the very, and 11% in the low, for a total of 41% in our low-income population, which is close to 4 million households. All right, so we used the LEAD tool to visualize energy burden across the state, and we decided to map the data ourselves so that we could do regional comparisons. And this map shows the average low-income energy burden by county. And again, our low income in this map is 0 to 80% of AMI. The minimum was under 6%, so this very light blue, which you don't see a lot of, and then maxes out around 20% for these really dark areas. And our 11 regions are called out and then listed here on the right. So where I think it gets more interesting is when we start to visualize the energy burden across the income segments. So showing low, very low, and extremely low, and then using the same color scale across all three of those maps. And you can really start to see what it looks like for people in that extreme income bracket, which is 1.4 million households across the state of Texas, where you have an average energy burden above 12%. So our next step with this work is to really start to dig into our regions so that we can better understand some of the factors that are going on that lead to some of these differences. And one of our starting places is to compare urban versus rural. This map shows locale classifications from the National Center for Education Statistics, and then cross-references that with energy burden data from the LEAD tool. The chart on the right shows that for the extreme segment, there is a meaningful difference in the average energy burden between rural and urban. So the rural is the green, and it's hovering at 15%, whereas the urban at 13%. So I'm going to shift over to our survey insights briefly. And I want to start with a quote from one of our in-person interviews in Waco, Texas. As Dana mentioned about coping strategies, this is an example of that. This person says, "We trade off by buying less food. We've been known to open the windows and go without AC in the summer and just turn on fans. And it does get hot sometimes. And then just cutting corners elsewhere, not going out to the movies and doing things with the kids." So what does that look like in terms of all of our survey respondents? So this chart presents responses to the question, do your utility bills cause you to delay or skip necessary spending or payments in any of the following categories? Please select all that apply. And as Dana mentioned, clothing and food are at the top. And what we found is that when it comes to the 18 to 24-year-old segment, 36% of them identified that they delay or skip food because of their utility bills. So we also, as Dana mentioned, found that survey respondents were fairly engaged with their household energy management as described by these charts. The first chart shows responses to being able to reduce household energy usage. 56% of respondents agreed and 25% were neutral. The positive responses increased with a question about reviewing one's electric bill each month. 68% agree. And similarly, 70% of respondents agreed that they understand how to program their thermostat. But when it came to program awareness, we found far fewer positive responses. On this chart, we compare program awareness for energy bill assistance in light blue, payment plans in green, weatherization in orange, and efficiency rebates in red. Weatherization had the lowest awareness at only 12% of low-income survey respondents, And bill assistance shows up on this chart as the highest level awareness, with 23% of respondents saying that they were aware of bill assistance programs. So circling back to how the LEAD tool better helped us understand the context for our survey data, I want to finish by sharing a summary of how it informed our understanding of the many factors that contribute to energy insecurity in Texas. So low-income households were 46% owner-income occupied, and conversely 54% renter-occupied, whereas non-low-income households were 74% homeowners. Most owner-occupied households, 89%, live in single-family homes. And most renters, or 70%, live in multifamily buildings. And as shown on the right, there was a strong inverse relationship between the number of units and energy costs. To say that another way, more units in a building is associated with lower energy expenses. Lastly, the low-income households were 2 times more likely to live in housing that was built before 1960. But we found a pretty weak relationship between the age of structure and energy costs for homeowners. However, there was a stronger relationship between the age of the building and energy costs for renters. So just to summarize that, there are more low-income households who are renting, and they tend to have lower expenses associated with being a renter in a multifamily building. However, there's also an increase in energy costs that comes with the housing condition of low-income renters. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Dana.
Awesome, Jackie. Thank you so much for sharing that with the team. I'm still so impressed every time we go through the data. I think new insights come out each time we talk about it. So I wanted to share with this group very quickly, what are we as an organization, kind of how do we take this information that we're learning, these insights, and put them into practice in a way, kind of the applied research way that informs different decision making. And so this, our low-income communities profile work is directly feeding into a new initiative that TEPRI has launched, which is funded by the Energy Foundation, which is looking at opportunities for distributed energy resources, specifically energy efficiency and rooftop solar, to begin to reduce energy burdens for low-income communities. And specifically, we're starting this initiative in Harris County, so Houston area. And we've got kind of a 3-part study that we're conducting, where firstly, we're looking at the energy affordability gap of the residents of low-income residents of Harris County, meaning the difference between kind of what people can afford to pay and what they're actually paying. Then we're conducting, using the LEAD tool and a couple of other data sets, conducting an evaluation of the affordable residential building stock, both single family and multifamily, and both big A and little a affordable, so tax credit properties and naturally occurring, and analyzing that building stock, looking at the potential for energy efficiency in those buildings and also the rooftop solar potential in those buildings. And part of the reason for that, you know, as Krystal alluded to at the beginning of our talk, we believe energy efficiency is certainly tried and true practice for reducing energy burden. And, you know, we think first to evaluate. We also think there's, or first to consider, we also think there's important potential for newer advanced technologies in terms of distributed generation, like rooftop solar, to address some of the both energy burden issues and address some of the disparities in access issues that we know are existing. So we've launched this study in Harris County, looking at those 3 kind of buckets. So looking at the energy affordability gap, looking at the energy efficiency potential in low-income housing, and then an evaluation of the rooftop solar potential. And we're convening a group of stakeholders in Houston, which include the utility, so CenterPoint Energy in this case, several retail electric providers, affordable housing providers. We've got some folks from the city involved, which is very exciting. in saying, how do we think we might use those 2 buckets of potential that we've identified in energy efficiency and rooftop solar to begin to address the energy affordability gap. So Jackie, if you'll go to the next slide, please. Here's some of our preliminary analysis. So using a lot of the same methodology that Jackie just took us through, we were looking at the energy burden as it's experienced in Harris County for the low, very low and extremely low income population to really try to understand the geographic distribution of energy burdens and how they're experienced in that county specifically. This data is then feeding into the analysis of the energy affordability gap. Next slide, please. And here, just kind of a graphical representation of the differences. And just like Jackie mentioned earlier, of course, the extremely low income population experiences the most severe energy burden there is in Harris County, as we might expect. We actually convened a group of stakeholders that I just mentioned in Houston yesterday to begin looking at this data and really talking through why we think that may be occurring and where, in which parts of the city, and how we might target some of our outreach and education and marketing efforts for existing programs and whether they're reaching the necessary populations there. Our next steps in this study will be to analyze the energy efficiency potential and rooftop solar potential, as I mentioned, and we'll have a series of 3 other stakeholder convenings where we look at those data sets specifically. And kind of the result of this will be what we hope to create is a roadmap co-developed with stakeholders in Houston to say, okay, how can we increase energy efficiency and rooftop solar penetration specifically in these communities in a way that reduces energy burden. So this is an ongoing project right now that we're kind of in the middle of. We hope to be able to release the roadmap in the spring of 2020. I would like to make a call to this group. Like I said, we do have the city of Houston involved, but if there are any city leaders on this call that would like to be involved in this project, we welcome your involvement as well. And I know we need to leave some time for questions, so I'll just summarize quickly by saying that, TEPRI's perspective, Jackie, if you'll go to the next slide, please, is that energy poverty is complicated and we need to analyze all of these different factors, including housing factors, essential energy needs, equitable access, and really kind of a multifaceted approach to be able to tackle energy poverty in Texas, and that is what we're working on. And I'll close by just saying kind of what's next with the study that we've prepared today. So we were sharing kind of the overview of Texas. We are creating regional reports for each of the 11 regions that Jackie described, which go into more detail of the specifics of those regions and higher level analysis of energy burden indicators in those regions. And we are also developing a geospatial tool, which will work with the LEAD tool, and we're hoping that can help individual cities, utilities for their service territories really understand the communities that they serve, so this data can feed into their programmatic decision making. And with that, I'll wrap it up and say thank you very much to Cassidy and Marielle for the opportunity to share this work.
Thank you, Dana and Jackie. That was great. Yeah, so as I mentioned to the audience, please, if you have any questions, type them in the Q&A box. We have a couple that have popped up. First, to clarify, this recording will be posted to the Sphere YouTube channel, along with the other City Efficiency Leadership Council webinars to date, as well as our codes webinars. A link to that will go out to the audience after this call. And typically slides also go out, not to put you on the spot, Dana, but are you okay with slides being shared?
Yeah, yes, of course, no problem.
Okay, thanks. One of these days I'll figure out how to do the prep for these webinars first.
Well, and Cassidy, if I may, we'd also love to share a link to the full report, if that's all right. So could we send that out at the same time so that folks can dive into the detail if they so choose?
Absolutely, and we will also include that link to the LEAD tool as well per Krystal's presentation. Because our program does have a city focus, one of the questions that has popped up is what can cities do in terms of programs, outreach, or just actual cities programs to support energy equity in their communities? Or what are some examples of programs that you're aware of?
This is Krystal from the Department of Energy. Oh, there's a wealth. There's quite a lot of cities really diving deep in this issue. One of the cities that we worked with was the city of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania, and they were focused on trying to bring renewable energy to low-income areas. And they did this big program, a solarized program, and they were oversubscribed, and they had to then do a 2.0 one. So there's a lot of different examples. I always recommend to city officials or even state officials that are looking into this issue is to really dig deep internally in your office about what your goals are, like what's your objective. And then that can really lead to what kind of programs you can create, because oftentimes, depending on the goal, you may be using a different sort of technology or a different sort of approach. So for Philadelphia, they were very much focused on deploying a lot of clean energy, but some other cities, have a plethora of different goals.
This is Dana, and I completely agree with Krystal's comments on that. And I'll also add, so I mean, my first reaction is, kind of individual needs assessments in terms of evaluating the needs of your community from an energy perspective. But then, and I think there's a lot that we can do in terms of using data sets like the LEAD tool, or asking questions like, with the data that TEPRI has provided here, to really try to get a comprehensive understanding of what the needs are and where they are within a given jurisdiction. But then I also want to add, and Jacquie, you may be able to comment on this too, that it's extremely important to authentically engage with the community members themselves, and not try to create new program design without involving community members. And I say that in part because this data is fantastic and gives us a lot of great insights. But there is a lot in terms of the lived experience of people, cultural preferences, community preferences that may not show itself. And so we found that it's extremely important to pair community outreach and engagement and some of those qualitative interviews like Jacquie was describing into those program design recommendations. Jacquie, is there anything you'd like to add on that front?
Not specifically. I'm glad you brought that up, and I think it's a challenging pursuit, and it does not happen without a lot of effort, and really requires going to where people are, because what we see is when there is an opportunity for people to come provide input, they either don't have the time or the resources to get there. So I think the outreach, when paired with organizations that are already serving those communities, will be much more successful. And then we've also found that the agencies that provide services to those communities can also be really great spokespeople, because they are supporting their lives on a daily basis. So it's just to acknowledge that it's not an easy task, but it is an important one.
And that leads into kind of an extension, which you've already started to touch on, is in your qualitative interviews, were you able to identify how those communities are engaging with the energy system? Where are those kind of lines of communication forming in their communities? Is it through civic leaders? Is it through houses of worship? Is it through utility program outreach? Kind of, have you been able to identify some best engagement practices?
We have heard from some of the agencies that we've talked to, just all those examples that you've mentioned, and that they're very context specific. Like, it's going to be different for each community. So in rural communities, we've heard that in Texas specifically, that houses of worship have been successful outreach. And then in reaching elderly population, Meals on Wheels as a partner is one that's been mentioned. So I think it varies depending upon the specific community, and that I would suppose that the city leaders are probably aware of those things, and it's a matter of bringing the right parties together to discuss the fit for that community.
And I would like to add to that too. I'm not sure if I can share my screen again, if that's possible.
You should be able to. Yeah, you should be able to just
so for folks who, I know we're out of time, or folks who are on the line. So I mentioned the Clean Energy for Low-Income Communities Accelerator. So we did create quite a few documents. And if you see my screen, you go to the website. I mean, I can talk for ages about some of the work that we did. That was pretty great. But one of the items that we did create was a stakeholder engagement resource document. And in that, if you can, when you see, we did an assessment with a few of the stakeholders, or with a lot of the stakeholders that we worked with, on who really are the game changers and the decision makers, and also the actors that you need in order to really move this along. And then it's a little bit of a long document, but you can get a sense of some of the different groups, as was mentioned before, just in terms of who you'd like to speak to. And then on that too, I mentioned Philadelphia as an example. We do have Philadelphia featured also in we have a lot of documents in our documents, and here you can see their program. I mentioned the Solarize Philly, and it goes into how they were able to put it together. So again, I recommend looking at this website. This website also is very new. This came out about a month ago, or maybe now it's a month and a half. And also happy to talk through anyone who has questions about some of the resources that are on here as well.
Great. Well, with that, we are out of time, but we'll, as I mentioned, we'll connect the audience with not only the resources shared today, including those last few that Krystal just went over, but also the contact information of our speakers for any additional calls. And so with that, again, we have an Energy and Water Nexus webinar on October 17th. Hope to see you all at that one. And thank you very much to our speakers and for this wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Everyone have a good afternoon. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.